Good morning, everyone. My name is Sunny Robles, and I am a 2L at the LMU Duncan School of Law. Our first presenter of the day is Attorney Rachel Karlin. Attorney Karlin is the owner and managing attorney at the law office of Rachel Bonanno. A graduate of UT Law, a proud mother of four, Attorney Karlin is fluent in Spanish and is passionate about immigration and immigration law. Managing a staff that is fully bilingual, Attorney Karlin caters to the Hispanic community of Tennessee. So without further ado, I present to you Attorney Karlin. Take it away.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me, LMU. Basically, today I've given a lot of types of immigration talks. I've been practicing law now for a little over 10 years. I have found that when I do these talks about immigration, that I prepare these complicated and nuanced presentations, and then actually I just spend the whole time explaining basic immigration concepts and dispelling myths and misconceptions. And I often get a reaction of, well, that doesn't make sense. And I say, well, yeah, if it sounds like it makes sense, it probably doesn't. And it's probably not true in immigration law. So I decided to do a talk on some of the things that would make sense, but they're not real things in immigration law. So there are several big concepts that I wanted to go over, but first I do want to preface by saying, this is a very small thing, but it actually is illustrative of the topic that we're talking about. One of the things that would make a lot of sense is that immigration attorneys are busy in general. It would make sense that when other people are trying to schedule with you, that they would try to coordinate times and dates when everyone is available. In the removal defense world, the immigration courts don't do that. So you can actually find yourself being double booked for things where you're supposed to be in two different courts at the same time, and then having to do a lot of extra work to ask for a continuance or something like that, when the court clerk in theory could have just picked up the phone and called you. So I say all of that to say that I was actually scheduled to do a bond hearing this morning in the middle of my presentation. And so I will have to take a very brief recess to handle that at some point if the judge calls in the middle of my presentation. Another thing that may or may not make sense is that bond hearings really only, I'm going to jinx myself by saying this, but they really only take about 5 or 10 minutes. I think the longest one I've ever had was about 30 minutes long. So anyways, I apologize about that in advance, and I want to get started on some of the bigger topics. I will say that my favorite part of these presentations is the question and answer section. And so I don't particularly want to talk more than I'm just randomly talk more than I'm answering questions. So, okay, 3 big things. I hear these things all the time, and I wanted to go over them. 3 big myths, I guess, or things that seem like they would make sense, but they're not real in immigration. So how many people out there, and you can, I can't actually see people, so I don't know if you want to raise your hand or just think to yourself, how many people think that, immigrants can just do it the right way? Like they can just get in line, why be undocumented? Just do it the right way. And while I understand the sentiment, you may be surprised to learn that for millions of people, there actually is no line to get into. There is no right way. There is no path. And that's actually for people who are here, many people who speak English, who have jobs, who have families, who are wonderful, decent human beings. There is no way for them to fix their immigration status. And so I think we should make one. But right now, the way the law is, there's not a line for many, many people. And I will ask one question, which is, I don't know if there are questions that come in are one of you guys going to tell me, or do I need to be looking for those in the chat?
We will save questions for the last 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So the second big topic I wanted to mention is if you are married to a U.S. citizen or have U.S. citizen children, a lot of people think, well, you've got your green card then, or you shouldn't be able to be deported because you're married to a U.S. citizen. Of course you wouldn't be able to be deported. Or you have U.S. citizen children, so of course you can't get deported. Well, that's not true. You may be surprised to learn that it's quite easy for the government to deport someone or have someone removed from the United States who is married to a U.S. citizen. They may have children who are U.S. citizens. Their parents might be lawful permanent residents or U.S. citizens, and they can still be deported. And then sort of big myth number 3, and really these all go, I mean, the last two kind of really go back to the first one, but if this one sort of comes from a lot of consultations that I've seen in my office, but there's sort of this myth out there that if you're a good person and you're a hardworking person and maybe you have a steady job and your boss could just come sponsor you, then maybe you would be able to get your green card. That is not true. So I have had a number of consultations, and I always say to people, well, if I had a nickel for every time I had this type of consultation, but I've had a fair number of consultations throughout the years where I'll have a very well-meaning, say, farmer come with his employee who, maybe we'll just say Mexican or Guatemalan, who doesn't have lawful immigration status. And he'll say, Jose here is just the best, just the best guy. I would love to sponsor him. I'll do anything. And, he's just such an upstanding person. And I have to tell them there's no way, and I can get into the nitty-gritty ins and outs of why that is. It's very, very complicated, convoluted, and confusing as to why the law is that way, but it is that way. And so, I think there's a lot of really common sense things that could be done to the law, or even just to the way the policies are implemented, that can make worlds of a difference. Small changes, like it doesn't even need to be comprehensive immigration reform, but teeny tiny small changes that would just make the world of difference. I'm used to giving these talks in front of large crowds, so I can kind of see who's nodding and who's responding to what and what's kind of resonating with people. So I don't have a good feel of that right now. So I'm curious, before I kind of move to the next topic, if any of the moderators have a particular point of interest they want me to kind of go down. Otherwise, I'm just going to start telling you all the things that I kind of mentioned in my email.
Yeah, you can go ahead. I think all of this is really interesting. And if you're in attendance, and there's quite a few of you here, if you want to ask questions in the Q&A or even in the chat, we'll be happy to pass those on.
There's one in the Q&A.
Okay. And I can't see that. Yeah.
I'll read it. Okay. It says, thank you so much for presenting. From your experience, would you say that immigration law is in demand or will always be in demand?
Yeah. So fortunately or unfortunately, I think a lot of immigration attorneys say we would love if the law were such that we didn't have a job, so there's a lot of us, particularly if we're, have been doing this for a long time. We've seen how it plays out in the real world for a long time and how cruel it can be, to the point that we see it for what it is, which is it's a set of racist laws. And I say that with no particular political party in mind or whatever, but the institution, the whole idea that some people should be excluded from some societies, it's rooted in racism, in my experience, both in the way that the laws are implemented the ways they play out. And in many cases, especially from the 1920s, their origins they're just racially based. And as long as racism is here, you will need immigration attorneys. That is my mildly political view about it. But from a business standpoint, I mean, yeah, anytime there's a teeny tiny change in the policy, we get inundated with phone calls. So even something as small as what I would call a prosecutorial discretion memo that gets changed or altered in some way, it gets put out on the Univision, Spanish radio and all that, and it goes through a bad game of telephone. So it'll be, oh, there's a memo coming out, and now we're going to be able to be legalized, and it's I have to field a lot of questions about that and spend a lot of time talking with people about what their options are. And frankly, sometimes those teeny tiny changes can make the difference between someone being able to get their papers or not because the law has changed, but because of the way the law is implemented has changed. I will give you an example of what I mean. So, okay, for example, and this is where I'm gonna have to get a little bit into the nitty gritty of all the nuances about the laws, but there's a category called special immigrant juvenile status. Often what will happen is there are children who come here and they are only with one parent, or they're without both parents. And to make a very long story short, they can find themselves eligible for the category of special immigrant juvenile. That category by itself does not automatically grant lawful permanent residence, but it's one step in the path there. Often though, what happens is when those people come into the process, they are placed in removal proceedings at the same time. So it means that the government is trying to remove this child from the United States. They have initiated removal proceedings, while at the same time, the child is in need of help and protection. So the way that plays out is if the child can get to a competent attorney before they turn 18 in Tennessee, and they can get a juvenile court order that would be the basis for their special immigrant juvenile application, then they can apply. And hopefully the way that the timing works out is that their immigration court hearing is such that they have enough time to do the other one. Depending on what's going on in immigration court, and depending on what the DHS attorneys are being told about how to prosecute these cases against children, deportation cases against children, that's a big topic we should talk about, will depend on whether they're going to be able to get relief over here. And it's not because the law is different. It's because once they get approved for that special immigrant juvenile status, they have to wait for a visa number to become available, which is, I could talk for days about what that means, but we'll just trust me when I say sometimes that's a 2 to 3 year wait. So in the meantime, if they go to immigration court and the policy is such that DHS is being told, you're not allowed to grant continuances, you're not allowed to, administratively close cases, ram these cases through as fast as you can because there's a million backlog. And what that means for that child, the child who is waiting for their visa number to become available, is it means that judge might order them to be removed while they are in the process of fixing their immigration status to that of a lawful permanent resident. You can have a policy memo come out, as one just did, that said, hey, you know what? These kids are applying for special immigrant juvenile status. We probably should not be trying to race them through to get an order of deportation. So that's my clock on the hour, every hour. Okay. Sorry. At least I'm not a cat. Yeah, I was telling Sunny yesterday, I was afraid I was going to come on Zoom and be like a cat and not figure out how to get my cat face off. But anyways, so the policy memo that just came out basically says, let's grant these kids deferred action, or on a case-by-case basis, USCIS, which is U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Hopefully I got that acronym right. They process the affirmative applications. They're supposed to do an independent review and, grant, as a matter of discretion, deferred action for some of these kids who are just waiting. They're just in a waiting period. So that's just a policy implementation. And it's huge. It means that kids who maybe they were 14, 15, 16 years old when they came in, they waited 6 months to get their I-360 approval. And now they're waiting 2 to 3 years to be able to apply for their green card. Before that memo came out, and kind of still now, they're not allowed to apply for a work permit, even though they're 16, 17, 18 years old. And all of their friends at school are driving and able to, work in theory if they're US citizens or lawful permanent residents. So just that little tiny policy memo change. And, we get calls, we get questions, we get, what about my work permit? And then we have to go into it and explain, well, it's just, we can't request it. They have to review it. Tiny, tiny changes. It's not even a statutory change. And it can make the difference between this person now has an order of removal and they're just stuck here and they've been here since they were a child and they can never fix their status, to not only can they fix their status, they're also going to get a work permit while they're waiting for their visa number to become available. It's just huge, huge difference that such one little agency policy memo can make. So yeah, I think we'll be, to answer that first question, busy for a long time, unless and until the government says we're going to have open borders. Immigration attorneys are going to have a job. Are there any other questions in the question and answer section?
Not at this moment.
Okay, so let's talk about children and removal proceedings. I can't see if anybody has their hand raised, but just think to yourself, should a child be able to be placed in a life-altering removal proceeding, first of all, at all? And if you think, well, yeah, but at least probably they should have an attorney appointed to them, since it's a life-changing thing. They don't have a right to an attorney provided by the government, unlike in criminal proceedings. Another big myth: removal proceedings are not criminal. They are civil. We can talk about whether or not they're technically civil. They look very much like criminal proceedings because a person can be detained during those proceedings. And then, depending on how cynical you are, if you want to get into, well, they're really criminal proceedings disguised as civil proceedings, because the constitutional protections when a person is in a criminal proceeding are greater. You have your 8th Amendment protections against cruel and unusual punishment. You have your right to counsel. So indigent defense, you have, I could go on and on, but you've got your 4th Amendment stuff on, right against unlawful search and seizure, stuff like that. Whereas in these immigration proceedings, these removal proceedings that are technically civil, you don't have 8th Amendment protections against cruel and unusual punishment, because it's not a punishment technically, because it's civil proceedings. But it kind of looks like criminal proceedings because you can be detained. Maybe you will be exiled from the country you're living in, which is kind of like going to jail, to be separated from your family and whatnot. But you don't get a lawyer. You don't have constitutional protections. And the consequences can be just as bad or worse sometimes. And so anyways, should a child be placed in that without counsel? Should they? No. Are they? All the time. All the time. You see on the border, you will see children with no parents in removal proceedings with no attorneys, unless they get a Catholic Charities or, a charitable attorney who's on the border. So I think that is nonsensical. I don't think it makes sense. I don't think Most people who have common sense would think that that's a good idea. And it's counterintuitive. So yeah. Any other questions about that before I talk about the asylum system and the work permits? Okay. So let's talk about work permits for a minute. It seems like, and it would make sense, that if a person is here, they're basically a good person, they just want to work, they ought to have a way to apply for a work permit. That is not always true. There are several categories of work permits. I want to say 20, 30, 40. There's a lot of different categories that could give a person the basis for eligibility. Some of them are more common than others. One of the most common ones that we see in our office is people who have a pending asylum claim. So in order to apply for a work permit while you're here applying for asylum to try and save your life, getting a work permit is actually quite difficult. So first you have to apply for asylum, and then you have to wait, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit because it's very technical, but you basically have to wait 6 months. If you, and then there could be consequences if you work during that time without authorization, although people do it all the time because they have to eat and live. But you apply for that work permit after 6 months, after your asylum claim is pending, meaning you've filed it properly. And then in theory, you get an answer back within 30 days. So essentially, under a best case scenario, a person comes here fleeing for their life. They have to file a very complicated asylum application. And often people don't do that. They just, okay, asylum, can I explain what it is? Yes, I forget that I live in this world where everybody I talk to knows what this is and not everybody knows what it is. Okay, so asylum is, there's two different kind of things that people think of when they think of asylum. One is asylum and one is refugee status. They are different. So like Joe Biden just designated 100,000 slots for Ukrainian refugees. Those are people who are outside of the United States who go and apply at the UNHCR, which is the United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees, I think, and essentially have to apply at a UN location to be approved for that refugee status. I can tell you based on my experience with some people who did that back during the Rwandan genocide and the African wars following that, it can take a few years. So it can take a couple of years to be granted refugee status. In the meantime, you just kind of have to figure out what you're doing until you get a travel document to come to the United States. Okay, asylum is the equivalent of that, but from within the United States. So a person has to get here and then they can apply for asylum. Asylum essentially means I'm scared to go back to my country of origin or country of last habitual residence because I am afraid that I will be persecuted on the basis of one of 5 statutory grounds. Those 5 statutory grounds, I'm probably going to botch these. The one we use the most is a particular social group. I think one of them is national origin. One of them is race, not race, but national origin, religion, political opinion, maybe race. I don't know. I almost never use those. It's almost always a particular social group. So you could say, you know, I am a homosexual person from Cuba. That's a particular social group that would be persecuted in Cuba. So, you know, just for example, if a person who falls into that group can make it to the United States and fill out their form I-589 with all of the appropriate attachments, they have applied for asylum. So they have applied for protection from persecution. There are a lot of protections once that application gets filed, in theory. One of the protections is that while a valid, non-frivolous asylum application is pending, and if the person is not working without authorization, they are not considered to be accruing unlawful presence. And that becomes important later for a bunch of different reasons. Right. So I do see that there's one question here in the chat that says, when you represent clients like Rachel is doing, is it because they have committed a crime or is it for an immigration issue? Did you guys discuss that while I was?
Well, we did, but you're welcome to pick up on that as well.
Okay. So yeah, so a lot of times it's, so the criminal defense work is separate from removal defense work. And basically, but they overlap in the sense that a lot of times a person will come into contact with the immigration enforcement and removal operations by way of being accused of a crime. So a lot of times what will happen is someone is arrested, they get put into the detention facility, and then from there, ICE comes in, places a hold on the person, and then they are essentially taken to Louisiana from here. There's different detention facilities around. So the person's charges could be totally dismissed, their criminal charges, but then they end up in removal proceedings because they came into contact with the jail. So did that answer the question for Anita?
I don't know if she, I think she's muted right now, but go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so I don't remember where I left off. I think we were talking maybe about asylum, the asylum system. What is asylum for
Yes.
permit? The process. Okay. So the person, they come in, they apply, they're saying, I'm afraid to go back to my country because I'm, in a certain, religion that's persecuted in my country of origin, or I'm a member of a particular social group. What is a particular social group is actually not defined by statute or in the regulations. I believe there are regulations forthcoming this year that would define more particularly a particular social group. But as of the last time I checked, there was not. And so what happens, and I think the law students will appreciate this, is that how that statutory term is construed, it varies from judge to judge, from court to court, from circuit to circuit. And sometimes it feels like it varies from day to day, even with the same judge or the same court. So it's not really, it's not super predictable, except to say that asylum claims based on particular social group membership persecution are extremely difficult to win. So because even if a person can prove that they are a member of a particular social group, then they have to prove all these other facts. They have to prove that the persecutor was a member of the government. And if they were a member of the government, if they were a non-governmental persecutor, then they have to show either that was with the essentially the person could relocate within the country. So the person pursuing their own claim might say, well, I'm being persecuted by non-governmental actors in society, but the persecution is so pervasive that there's nowhere within my own country that I could move to keep me safe from persecution. And then they have to prove that there's a nexus between their particular social group membership and the claimed persecution. Also, the level of persecution is not just people don't like me. It has to be something that's past a certain level of bad. I had a client once who had been threatened. I won't get into the particular details of the trauma, but it was something that if it happened to any of us, even just once, like at like a Walmart parking lot, we would probably be traumatized for years. And it had happened to this woman multiple times. And the immigration judge said, well, gosh, it's really, you're not dead. So like, it's just didn't really rise to the level of persecution, because it only happened like 10 times. So, and, you weren't actually injured despite the fact that you were threatened with a weapon on multiple occasions by basically the same people. So they're very, very difficult to win. And, I think there are some courts where the grant rate is like less than 2%. Memphis, I think, has probably a little bit better of a grant rate, but they're hard to win. How long do those cases take? It depends. There's two types of ways that asylum can be filed. One is affirmatively. So before a person gets put in removal proceedings, that usually happens for people who come on a tourist visa or who are, they somehow make it through the border without being caught by Border Patrol. Let's see, here we go. Okay. And yeah, so affirmatively, and then they only have 1 year to file it. And then there's people who come and they're placed in removal proceedings and they file what's called a defensive asylum claim. And there's like, I could teach like weeks and weeks of classes about that. Okay, so I have a question here, bottom line question. Are you typically working with indigent clients, a wider range of economic backgrounds? How much of your work is dedicated to pro bono work? That's a great question. A lot of times, especially when I talk to law students or other people, they say, you probably can't do this work because, you know, these people are very poor. And I will say that our office is a for-profit office. There are many nonprofit organizations that do asylum work or immigration advising for indigent populations. We are not that, and we have a pretty good screening procedure to for that, you know, because we're a for-profit business, and we have employees that have to get paid and overhead and whatnot. We do have sort of a process that, I mean, we charge for our initial consultations. So if a person is truly indigent, they usually can't afford our consultation fee. And so that being said, we do typically, the firm does typically handle 1 to 2 pro bono cases a year. We usually handle 1 to 2 low bono cases, which I would say is like, we charge like a nominal fee. We can't really afford to do more than that. And so let's see, a wider range of economic backgrounds. Yes. One of the things that I see is a lot of our clients, when they first come, they have sort of like a person here who is helping them, a person, an aunt, an uncle, a brother, a sister, who says, you know what, I'll help you get on your feet. I'll loan you some money. And, you know, a few years down the road, our clients they're employed, they're partnered, they're having kids, like they're figuring it out. You know, they've moved up the socioeconomic ladder a little bit. And then usually it's in the next generation when, you know, their kids are, you know, going to school and starting to go into that more professional world. And, you know, frankly, because they're able to, because they have work permits. But yeah, I would say a large percentage of the folks coming over the border who are seeking asylum are probably, I guess, probably of limited means, and there's just not enough attorneys out there to help. I really wish that all attorneys would learn how to do asylum cases so that every attorney in town could take like 1 free asylum case every year, even if immigration law is not their main area of practice. And I would talk anybody through one of those cases. Just to, you know, really kind of spread and get to the underrepresented or unrepresented people who need access to justice, basically. Do I have a chance to engage in policy advocacy to elected officials? If so, what level of government? That's a great question. So one of the things I really would like our firm to start doing is impact litigation. We do have one case right now that I would consider to be impact litigation, where we do have a specific client with a specific case against the Knox County Sheriff's, against the Knox County Sheriff and Knox County government because of the 287G program. And that is an active litigation right now. And it is intended to get rid of that program. And it is intended to have a policy effect. But, you know, I have a real client with a real justiciable issue there. And so I don't engage in policy advocacy in the sense of contacting lawmakers, or in the sense of, going and testifying at the legislature. If I could, I probably would, but I think that the way that I advocate is I talk to all of you fine people who are going to school and hopefully one day will be elected officials and teach you things about immigration, so that when you go out there, you make statements that are informed and you make decisions and policy decisions that are informed, rather than getting on a podium and saying a bunch of stuff that's not true. So I think that that's the way that I engage in policy advocacy. And I know we've got maybe 3 minutes left, I think. Do you have a chance to work with other immigration attorneys in the area, maybe through KBA or TBA? Sadly, the immigration bar here is not huge. We all kind of know each other. There are a lot of us who, they're unlike, we'll say, divorce law, where there are several attorneys. I could pick up the phone and say, hey, I've got this situation. What would you do? Immigration law locally is not like that. There is, me and probably less than 5 like really serious, busy immigration removal defense attorneys. I am not counting like employment immigration. That's an area that I don't really do. Let's see, what are the differences in representing an immigrant? Okay, what are the differences in representing an immigrant that came into the country legally as opposed to one that came in illegally? So that is a great question. I could talk about that for about 3 hours. My answer is it depends on what form of relief that they're seeking. In immigration court, if we are doing a defensive asylum claim, there are 2 ways that a person could have come in at the border. One is to go to a port of entry and say, hey guys, I'm coming through the doors and I'm asking for asylum. And the other way is to come over the border and then go, hey guys, I'm crossed over the border already and I'm asking for asylum. And that matters in the charging document. Matters in the charging document whether or not the person gets called an arriving alien or not, and if they get charged under 212A6 or 212AC, and it's really, really technical. And then as it relates to family petitions, a person who came, let's say they have a lawful entry and they're being petitioned by a US citizen immediate relative, which is statutorily defined, they might be able to adjust their status here instead of having to consular process where they go back to their country of origin for their interview. And that's a very, very broad, it's very fact specific. So like, don't take that and run with it and give people legal advice on it, because it's very, very fact specific. Okay.
Alrighty, I think that's all of the questions, and I know you're super busy. First of all, I want to thank you personally for making